Okay, so let's get started. Welcome everyone to this Placer AI webinar, Retail in Q1, Early Lessons and Looking Ahead. Very excited to have you here today. A quick overview of what we're going to be doing. We're going to start with a super brief introduction of Placer for those of you who are new. We are then going to look back at some of the biggest things that we saw happening in Q1 and break them down and try to understand what we actually saw and what it means moving forward. And then we are going to have a more forward-looking view at some of the big trends we've seen 2 years since kind of the start of the pandemic's retail impact. We have this kind of wide amount of data now, a little bit of distance. We're going to go back into some of those big trends and see if our opinions or what we thought about them has changed a little bit since then. And then, as always, we're going to leave some time for Q&A. If at any point throughout the webinar you have a question, please just hit the Q&A button at either the top or bottom of your screen, depending on how you have Zoom situated. Shoot them over. We will try to get to as many either within the course of the conversation or at the end. I am thrilled today to be joined by my amazing guest, Elizabeth Bolden Thomas, Director of Marketing and Research and Research Strategy at Bayer Properties. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us once again.
Hi, thank you. Glad to be back.
And our first-time guest, Nicole Popovics, EVP Managing Director of the Shopping Center Group. Nicole, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to join.
We are very excited. And quickly before we get to the actual content, a little introduction to Placer again for those of you who are new. Placer is a location data company. What that means in the simplest terms is people vote with their feet, and we are showing you how they vote across the United States every single day. How do we do that? We observe a panel of over 30 million devices throughout the country. Very critically, this is all anonymized aggregate data, so we are GDPR and CCPA compliant. We then analyze that data with AI and machine learning algorithms to make estimations on visits to retail locations across the country. And we present that data in a wealth of different reports within our platform on everything from true trade areas, voids, market share, cross-shopping, and a whole lot more. If anyone is interested, we have a free version of our premium product at placer.ai that you can check out. We also have a section on our website called The Square, placer.ai-the Square, with a whole bunch of free tools that you can play with that we are constantly updating and playing with. And now to the important part, the actual the content itself. So I want to start with, I do think there's this kind of necessary, let's kind of set the table of what we actually saw in Q1. And Nicole, I want to start with you here. There was like an endless onslaught of challenges. After a year and a half where we thought we saw everything, it feels like Q1 was like, well, what about this? It was like the last level of like a video game, and it's like the bad guy throwing everything they have at you. So it was Omicron, inflation, rising gas prices, and a whole lot more. Did we learn something new about brick and mortar retail from the way the year kicked off?
I would say I think it's necessary to have, right? We've got to have the brick and mortar. And I think you're just seeing a lot of those events that happened over the first quarter are going to continue to trickle into into this Q2, and what kind of longer term effects does it have are still unknown for brick and mortar. But I think we'll get more into that as we go through the presentation. So I would say, I think, yes, everything was thrown at us, but I do think that things are starting to correct itself. And I do think you'll see a little bit of a lasting effect through this Q2.
That's interesting. I mean, that's like kind of one of the big questions we've been grappling with is this like a quick rebound, or are some of these challenges like more unique? And Elizabeth, I'll go to you with this one. There is this kind of, there was just a lot. And I think that like sometimes we lose sight of just how much has happened in such a short period of time. And I think it's forced a lot of shopping centers to change the way they operate, at least in the short term. Do you think that some of these shifts that have been necessitated by kind of what we've seen recently, do you think they are positive from a longer term perspective?
Definitely for consumers, 100% yes. I think, this has forced shopping centers, landlords, and developers to provide more options for consumers. And if they weren't already, it's definitely forced us all to be more consumer, customer centric, and thinking about what the consumer wants from us in order to get them back to the shopping centers. Positive or not, though, I do think it has changed. It has forever changed retail. And, while it's been positive for consumers, I'm not sure if it's necessarily negative for landlords or developers, but it has certainly given us more to consider, to research, to negotiate in leases, to manage, to market, all of that, to make sure that we are doing the best that we can to get consumers back to the shopping centers.
It's so interesting because there is, like you mentioned, there's just more that needs to be done because the consumer expects more. And so kind of shopping centers need to provide more, and that demands flexibility. But the one thing I keep on looking at is it feels like this was kind of a kick in the pants that has ultimately made brick and mortar retail stronger, which is, I think, one of the really exciting takeaways. I mean, obviously, overall sales numbers need to be taken with their necessary context, but it was interesting to see online down a little bit and kind of brick and mortar coming back, again, with all the context necessary there. But I'll start with you again here, Elizabeth, like in terms of the actual volatility of it and how rapid this kind of cycle of changes has been, how do you kind of approach an environment like that where there's just this series of ongoing challenges? What does it mean as a shopping center owner, the way you need to evolve in order to deal with this kind of constantly changing environment?
Well, so before I answer that, I thought it was interesting when I was reviewing these to prep. I thought it was interesting that the outlet malls in, I think it was February and March, saw such significant decreases when we know everything that was going on, as you mentioned, inflation, gas prices, then the volatility between with Russia and Ukraine, that consumers didn't flock to those stores or centers. So I'll say that. Then I'll go a step further to say I think there are some things that are just universal truths. Consumers, they want to consume and dine out and be entertained. And so I'm not sure that will ever change. I say that not knowing what the metaverse will bring for all of us. But I do think that the way in which these activities, consumers want to do these activities, that has certainly shifted. Again, I think it goes back to, being consumer centric. That is tough these days because consumers can be very fickle. I think you said this at the beginning, though, Ethan, is, consumers vote with their feet, where they shop, where they spend their money. And so, oftentimes what consumers say that they want can be very different than what they actually do. And that's where the placer data comes in and the sales data from our shopping centers to see how are consumers shopping, how are they coming to the shopping center, what times, do they return, what stores are performing well or not so well. So I think, it's just constantly staying on our toes and looking at the research to see, what consumers really want versus the surveys, which I think can be helpful to some degree for that qualitative data, but it really comes down to where do they shop and how do they spend their money.
I want to harp on that point for a second, because I think you touch on something that's so critical of like survey data and sentiment data is unbelievably valuable. It gives us a sense of how people are thinking and what they're feeling, but it is different from actionable data. And like the example that always sticks out in a past life when I was at a digital intelligence company, it was the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And there was, I think 30% of adults in the UK said they were going to get rid of Facebook. Like that, 30%, right? It was very strongly or 100% going to get rid of it. And the change we saw in the data was 0%. No change whatsoever. And that doesn't mean that sentiment isn't important. It just means that there is a difference between what we're feeling and what we're doing. And like Nicole, I mean, I want to go to you with this. Like there has been so much change. How do you determine in these environments what's something that's real and therefore kind of a longer term opportunity, and what's this kind of short term bubble, and how does it influence the way you identify opportunities?
Yeah, so we were talking a little bit about this internally, and one thing that our clients and the retailers want are the density, right? So as long as you've got the density, they should be able to survive. So we really have taken a look at that for the long-term aspect of going for new sites. From the bubble aspect, is this suburban expansion a bubble? We don't think so, because you are starting to gather, the density within those markets, but you're still having such an influx in the Southeast of so many people transitioning, that it's creating more dense pockets, which is why I think we're seeing some of the, a lot more of these retailers coming to these markets and really going after things that they may not have in the past, because the density has grown so quickly.
That's such a good point. I think, some of these changes have obviously have situated some retailers in better positions than others. And so, and Nicole, I'll start with you here. I'd love you to give me one retailer whose kind of performance really stood out to you in Q1, and tell me why.
So I was thinking about this last night, and you brought up the pet category, and I think the auto category is one. So like an AutoZone or O'Reilly's is somebody that has really in Q1 probably seen a nice amount of sales, with the car pricing and the supply on new and used cars not being there, and people having to fix their cars versus buying a new or used. I would throw auto into this list of some success for the quarter.
That's a really good one. Elizabeth, same question for you. A retailer whose performance in Q1 kind of stood out for you, and why?
So not an original answer. It is actually Target, who I know is featured on this slide. I'm just constantly amazed at Target and how they just continue to innovate for customers and make it so easy. I recently read an article that not only, because we know that they were such a COVID winner with their curbside pickup, the app, the ease of using all of that. And so I'm just constantly amazed at how they are continuing to just offer more and more things. And I recently read that now they are experimenting with bringing customers a Starbucks order to their curbside pickup, as well as doing returns at curbside. And I just think that is so amazing, because that just makes it so easy for consumers to go to Target, even when they can't necessarily go inside. And I think, these smaller DTC brands are even realizing the value in Target, because, the recent collaboration that Stony Clover did with Target, just to almost use Target as like an awareness channel for them. And so I think there's definitely value, even from the Stony Clovers of the world all the way to Ulta, launching the store within a store type thing at Target.
That's such a great answer.
I think they really get the convenience factor, and they really know their customer. And that has really shown over the past few years for them, with adding that curbside pickup, and it was 2 stalls. Now it's, at ours, it's 8 stalls, and really using that as a distribution point to gain more customers over time. I think, in the past 2.5 years, I would be curious to see, how many new customer accounts did they get from that? It just seems like they really have dove into who their customer is and how to get new ones from a convenience.
Completely agree with you. I also think there's the added element of the consumer knows that Target has their back. Like that, you're not always using curbside. But the fact that it's there does give you this positive connection. The fact that you can get your Starbucks there gives you this I think Target, more than anyone, really, Nicole, you said this, they really understand their audience. Every time we look at who they're targeting, who their audience is vis-a-vis some of their biggest competitors, you think about their decisions like, Apple stores in stores, Disney stores in stores, Ulta obviously being like the really popular one. It always fits so perfectly for their audience, and it's such a differentiator for their specific segment of the market. I agree with you. I think that customer understanding is at the top. There's few who can match that level, and it's one of the reasons for their success. I think with the ones that impress us, there's also the ones that surprised. And Elizabeth, I'll start with you. There are some segments, and I think fitness for us was one of the really big ones, that if you think of the discussion we were having 2 years ago, it was, it's all Peloton, goodbye fitness. Yet they've had this really strong recovery. What does their resilience show you about the future of brick and mortar in general?
So interesting. So I have a Peloton that was purchased during COVID, and it's a lovely piece of furniture now that I occasionally use. And actually, I did a recent fitness class with some coworkers on last Thursday. Had buyer's remorse the minute I signed up for the class because I'm not a fitness person, evidenced by my Peloton furniture. But I think, it was such a fun thing for us to do together. We had a great time. I'm still sore and recovering, but I think it goes back to, it was a social event for us, not just for us as coworkers, but to try it out together, to even kind of like commiserate and complain a little bit during class together, but be, challenged and have that instructor there on site, pushing us to work harder. And so I think it goes back to, I know I've said this a few times already, but some universal truths. Humans are social creatures and we need that interaction, the in-person interaction, the environment of a gym, being around others that are like-minded, fitness enthusiasts. And so I think that, is coming back and will continue to increase. To me, I think about shopping centers because I know, at one time everything was focused on fitness, and then it was kind of during COVID, we were all focused on home furnishings and home decor. I think shopping centers are kind of like an investment portfolio. You have to diversify in terms of, consumers, how they shop during the day as opposed to the weekends or, day and day parts, and then generationally, and then also socioeconomic interest.
I think the fitness one, this a la carte fitness thing, is so significant in the sense of, I have a Peloton subscription, I go to Planet Fitness, and twice a week I have a SoulCycle class. I do CrossFit, I have a Blink Fitness subscription too for going on the treadmill. It's not just one thing. I think we're getting more and more used to having these multiple elements that are part of our mix. I mean, and Nicole, I'll turn to you now. Like, when you think about the brands that really surprised you, or the segments that surprised you, do you think there are wider lessons to be learned from how they interacted with these challenges?
Well, listen, Elizabeth brought something up, getting together with friends, being social. There's still pent up demand for hanging out and collectively getting back together. And people are much more open to that idea. So whether they do it through fitness or, we're talking a lot about experiential things that are happening. So it's an experience. Experiential has been, something that retail was heading this direction. But I think with COVID and nobody being together, obviously now this pent up demand is really making experiences even more exciting because everybody's missed out for a little while. So, stores for me in this segment, the sporting goods was something that I found, I thought interesting that everybody's getting back into or has popularized golf, or Dick's has come out with all of these other concepts that have an experiential component to them. So you can go and shop, but you can also hang out in, one of their concepts. You play basketball, or you can do a rock climbing wall. So there's multiple things that are going on within the store. So I think for me, sporting goods was one that was really interesting because, a lot of people thought that was sort of dead. And it has, fully come back, from the golf side with PGA Superstore has, multiple bays where you can practice with the virtual screen, and you can test putt and you can test clubs, you can get fitted. I think it's really interesting.
I like that example because I always get caught up with experiential with the climbing wall, and it's a little gimmicky, but I think that getting fitted, making sure you find the right thing, that is, we did a webinar with Billy Taubman about a month ago. And one of the things he kept on saying was experience is what you expect from the brand to give you. So if it's a high-end luxury, experience is the way you're treated too. It's not just the flashier things, but it's what makes the retail experience better. And I really, really agree with that. I mean, interesting. John just came in through the Q&A saying, so fitness sources are like media, multiple subscriptions, iTunes, XM radio, cable, Netflix, etc. And John, it's literally exactly what I have in my head when you said that, of Netflix, Disney Plus, Hulu, we have our mix, and that's okay. And customers are becoming increasingly comfortable with managing that mix. We're less committed to any one thing. which creates a variable for the brands themselves, but also an opportunity to create these kind of new complementary relationships. But I do for all of the kind of these positive surprises, and there are a lot of them that they're kind of worthy of recognition, there are also kind of regressions. And I think this is something we were talking about already mid last year of like, beware everyone, we're going to see regressions from great companies and great brands. And it's not because they're bad, it's because the heights they hit were unsustainable. But Nicole, I mean, the biggest example of this is the home improvement sector. And, just how strong they had been, but that strength has dissipated. How do you approach if you're the retailer or you're relying on that retailer? How do you interact with a time like this where you had this really unique height, but now you're coming back down to earth?
Right. Well, I think it's all leveling out, right? Because home improvement's interesting because the pricing on materials and everything went up, and then you had supply chain issues. So they had a lot of things stacked against them. As did everybody. I would say theirs was maybe a little bit more from a material standpoint. I wonder, in this segment, is furniture one that, sort of goes down this route with everybody home? They wanted to redo their house and do new furniture. Has it reached its peak? Are they going to start to see some of the same, regressions? I don't know. I don't have the crystal ball, but I would guess there may be a little bit of a correction in that.
So luckily, I do have my crystal ball here. I can't
Perfect.
show you, but I have it. I think you're right. I think but it's not. It's again. I think we have to. The silly example that we use is, LeBron James has a 30-point season, and the next year he has a 27 points per game season. It doesn't make the 27 points per game bad. It just should hopefully allow us to appreciate the 30 points per game. And I think that's kind of the context we need to have. And speaking of that context, Elizabeth, when you see those sectors that like essentially exceeded any expectation we could have possibly had, but then they decline, how do you contextualize the performance? Like, what's the process you go through to try and understand if, is this, a 30 points per game to 27 points per game, or is it something bigger?
Well, I think Nicole hit on this is, a lot of retailers had the odds stacked against them with the supply chain issues as well as the labor shortage. We continue to hear that at all of our shopping centers, about the labor shortage part. And so I'm curious to see, and I think this remains to be seen into Q2, is are these true declines, or are they still combating some of those issues where, they simply don't have the materials to sell or the staff to sell them? And so I think that remains to be seen. The silver lining in all of this, just to help contextualize, is I do think, regardless of the declines that we are seeing for some of these, COVID winners, is the silver lining is the customer acquisition that they had, and so I think when we think about just historically what happens with retail, everything kind of ebbs and flows. Like now fitness is back, as we just hit on. And so when you're in that ebb and you're preparing for the next flow, you do have this new customer base that you can think about and try to expand on for that next retail flow, so to speak.
That was really well put, Elizabeth. I'm going to steal that and pretend I made that up. That was very well said. we got a great question. Sadly, it's from an anonymous attendee, so we don't know whose genius this was. But he or she asked, if successful retailers will be those that provide experiences in their stores, how do you suggest brands partner for those interactive in-store experiences?
Well, I would tell you it's not just the experience, but also the service, right? We're very service oriented right now. So if they have an experience for you to do, but they can't offer the service aspect, I don't think that they will survive. I shouldn't say wouldn't survive. I think they'll be a little bit more difficult than if you offer both service and experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing I would say is just making sure that there is that customer alignment, because I think for some brands it would be really odd if they partnered, like for example, if Home Depot partnered with, I'm trying to think, like a Lululemon. I feel like that would be an odd collaboration. So it has to make sense, not just for the consumer, for the use, but the type of consumer that they're typically going after. I think that's why so many of Target's collaborations have worked so well, because there is that customer alignment. So making sure that that's there, and that you're well researched when it comes to your shopper, and who and what they are and where else they shop, and what brands that they're interested in.
As it's very such an both of those are such important points. And this idea of like experiential is not one size fits all, but if it's essentially if it's misaligned, it doesn't work. So if it's not aligned with what your customers want, it's not going to work. And if it's not aligned with the services that you're providing and what you're attempting to accomplish, like it doesn't work. It's a cute gimmick, but it's not more than that unless it's part of this kind of bigger picture. And you know, speaking one of these areas where the bigger picture seems very much aligned, like we've seen, you know, grocery really gain. It was essential retail. It was open. Then we had this wider economic uncertainty. So the grocery store was like a cheaper meal. People got more into cooking. We have inflation that can hurt restaurants, like gas prices that hurts. All of these kind of things seem to keep on powering this grocery wave. And Elizabeth, I'll start with you here. What do you think has made this sector specifically so regression proof, and how have they managed to sustain that success even as things have leveled off?
Well, aside from the obvious, as you've stated, that people have to eat, they still do have options. And so, when grocers are fighting over market share, how do they do that? And I think it's really evolving and keeping up with their customer. And grocers, I think, have done one of the best jobs in providing all those different options with curbside delivery, whether it's through a subscription like Instacart or Shipt, which is, I have to plug Shipt because it's a Birmingham based company. So a little plug for our hometown folk. But I think, they offer so many different ways to get groceries to consumers. And I really think, that has paid off.
I think it's such an important point, and little known, but Birmingham was one of my stops on the East Coast, so shout out Birmingham. But Nicole, do you think this is a long-term trend for grocery, or do you expect like the brands that have thrived in recent years to continue to see this type of growth?
I do. And I think you may see grocery evolve in different ways. If you look at some of the predictable items that you get at the grocery store, such as, paper towels monthly or toilet paper monthly, like some of those items, I would say maybe they go off the shelf and you get them through another avenue, or you can order them online, or there's an option for that. But I think maybe you'll see the inside of the grocery, the items change a little bit, but I don't see this changing. I think the trend of eating at home, where pre-COVID, I think we got to the all-time eating out rates. I think we're back down to eating at home a few nights a week. And with, like you said, the cost of everything going up, I think you're going to see more and more people cooking at home, and people have started to find the passion for that again. So I think that's all going to continue to help with grocery, and the more influx of people in certain markets, and obviously the grocers are going to expand even more. I do think that there are a lot of grocery options in some areas, so will you see some consolidation in those? Maybe, but I don't see the trend going down.
I very much agree with you, and I think it's one of these things that's really going to last. I want to get to a question that came in, and it's somewhat related to what we were discussing just before, and it's another anonymous attendee. So we're going to call her Deborah. Thanks, Deborah. How is omnichannel strategy being impacted by changing consumer sentiments and pattern shifts other than inflation and these kind of challenges?
Wow, that's a big question, Deborah.
Yeah.
I'll start with this one. It's becoming that our perspective on Omni is that, one, it's obviously unbelievably critical, and it's the digital piece is unbelievably important, but that's not changing. The big change is the role of physical stores within the omnichannel picture. And that's from a marketing perspective, it's from e-commerce uplift, it's from logistics and delivery. So the omnichannel perspective is widening because we're starting to view it. Again, this doesn't mitigate any of the values of the digital side, but we're starting to look at the physical store as having more roles to play within the wider omnichannel strategy.
Yeah, and I think before we saw it as maybe a threat, we saw it as a big threat. Now we're seeing it as, very cohesive.
Absolutely. Elizabeth, were you going to say something?
No, I would agree. And I think it's not just, to me, I think at one point we were, laser focused on all of these DTC brands who were looking to brick and mortar for more of an awareness avenue, in replacement of or in coordination with their digital and social ads. But now I do think it is more of a fulfillment role. And I think that's even why you have, and I think I'm jumping ahead, so sorry, Ethan, but I think that even goes into Amazon. I know, when we think about, Amazon doesn't have an awareness issue. It's, they need fulfillment. They need help with fulfillment, quite simply.
So, you know what? I love this. What a perfect segue. And then we're going to get to a question also that came in simply. And, Elizabeth, because you brought us here, I'll let you start. It's 5 years. We just recently passed the 5-year anniversary of Amazon buying Whole Foods. And it was initially seen as this like massive threat to brick and mortar.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that it's the fact that they are rapidly expanding their physical footprint, Amazon Go, Amazon Fresh, this conversation is about a department store, et cetera. Do you think that it's actually made it into one of brick and mortar's biggest advocates?
I do. And for the reason I just said, it's not just, I think brick and mortar can do a lot of things, and a lot of things are being asked of brick and mortar, not just the awareness as we initially thought, but it is the fulfillment, it is the customer connection, it is building brand loyalty and brand affinity, because there is a certain level of brand affinity that I think you can build online and through influencers, but I think there's nothing like that in-store, like human connection with the brand. And so I think when you go into any type of Amazon brick and mortar, it reinforces the convenience, the automation, just that whole Amazon experience that we expect online.
It's a great point. Nicole, I'd love your take on this as well. Like, what do you think the acquisition of Whole Foods meant for brick and mortar retail?
So it's interesting, a few different things. If you remember back when they were coming in, retail was dead, right? Retail was dead. Nobody's doing anything. And then all of a sudden Amazon comes in and retail's back alive. So I thought that was an interesting as far from your timeline. But I think what they also did is, they were able to bring in new customers through their Prime subscription into Whole Foods that they've never had before. Because of the discounts that you get. And I find that extremely fascinating. I wasn't a Whole Food shopper. And then, now that I can have the discount point to it, it made it a lot more appealing. Everybody thought it was, so expensive. It was this, it was that. There were a lot of things about Whole Foods. So when Amazon came in, it really has changed the mindset, through I think the discount component.
That's a great point. I want to get to another. Guys, put your names on. We don't want to see anonymous attendee. This is a great one. So, thoughts on the grocery delivery model? I think even within the Amazon framework. What do you think? How significant is grocery delivery? Elizabeth, let's start with you.
I think it's huge. I think it enables people to get what they need sooner, quicker on their timetable. Again, it's thinking about what the consumer needs, not necessarily what's, from the retailer's perspective. And we've already touched on this. It's not an either or for consumers. It's not, am I going to get these groceries in store or not? It's, am I going to get these groceries from Whole Foods or somewhere else that will allow this, to be delivered to my door? And while they may do delivery one day, the very next week they may go in store. And so I think it just helps reinforce that brand affinity for consumers and knowing that they can get their groceries however they want, whenever they want.
Well, and not just from one grocer either, right? So you can order, I can go to Publix inside the store. I can now order at Whole Foods and have it delivered. And then I can swing through Aldi and pick up. So where before, I think you went to one shop, now this is giving you an opportunity to get different things from different stores that you like as a consumer. And you can literally have it all right within an hour or 2 hours of that same time frame. So you're not having to spend an hour at Publix, an hour at Whole Foods, and an hour at Aldi. So again, it goes back to convenience, and we've become so convenience driven, whether it's through the drive-through, the pickup, now through the delivery. I think you're going to see it's just an added component, and it lets you multitask.
Yeah, and
Well,
for
and
which
I agree, Nicole.
items?
Yes, and I agree, because I think most people, and I'm going to say a lot of moms, just because me being a mom and a female, I feel like most women and most moms go to multiple grocery stores for their weekly grocery shopping. And so I think that's a great point, Nicole.
I agree with you completely. I think that the thing that we're not looking at enough in terms of grocery delivery is what's going to power that next level to make it cost effective for the grocers. Micro fulfillment is a huge trend to track in grocery, but even more, watch its impact happen on more shopping centers as direct to consumer brands come offline and they want to use their stores more than just a place to sell, but to distribute. Micro fulfillment within shopping centers, I think that is the big, from my crystal ball, that is the big tech trend to watch. But before we get into the consumer shifts, another question came in that I do want to get to. I love the questions coming in. Any thoughts on the increasing delivery costs? I mean, this comes in from Tommy. I'll answer it. Yeah, it's gonna limit people doing delivery and it's gonna push people to stores.
I think it's
especially
become the
because
cost
I've
of,
already seen it in my own bill.
Yeah.
yeah. And I think it's the cost of doing business. I think, whether that's passed on to the consumer or absorbed by the tenant, what they may pay for that delivery service may come off in, parking lots, or the size of their store, or the staff that they need in store.
That's a great point. I'm gonna skip this because I want to go to some of the other ones. We've had some other questions and I want to make sure we have enough time for them. This is one of the things that is racking my brain a lot, and I'll give the context before I go to both of you with the same question. Work from home is I think arguably the most significant thing that's come out of the pandemic in terms of a potential long-term trend. The only thing that is giving me a lot of pause about how big this impact could be is watching things get a little dicier in kind of the wider economic situation and thinking about, we are one difficult economic scenario away from people being like, I'll come into the office every day. Just give, the second people need to fight for the job again, the power dynamic flips. That's the thing that keeps on sitting in my head. Otherwise, I think this is unbelievably significant. I'll start with you, Nicole, here. 2 years on, how significant will hybrid work's impact on retail real estate be?
So I think it is very impactful. And I think what it has done and what I love most about it, and I think Elizabeth could probably speak to this even more, is, we talk a lot about dwell time. And I think that you're seeing shopping centers that before may have been more activated later in the afternoon and at night, they're activated from morning through night because people can go to the grocery store or go to the dry cleaner in the middle of the day versus after school or after work. So I think that's really exciting for it. I guess the question is, if people are going back to fighting for their jobs and having to go into the office, or if that becomes more and more mandatory, that is a big question mark. What does that overall do for the center? I think it shifts it back to the more evening and night, but I don't know that that's going to happen. The hybrid work situation has just been the hot topic, and I don't see it so-called changing. I think it will become some more mandatory days within the offices, but I think you're going to have hybrid work situations for a while.
I think Elizabeth, same question. How significant will hybrid work's impact on retail real estate be?
Huge. I think it has changed the landscape. We are seeing more densely populated suburbs. Urban centers and areas have not recovered as quickly or as strongly. So I think that's going to have some staying power. Thinking about this in terms of as an employee, and then also as a part of a shopping center manager, I think employees and companies have to really, or employers and companies have to really think about how to amenitize and convince their employees, what is the value of coming to the office beyond just, we've all heard, just the collaboration that's enabled when you are there, in person. but thinking about, the proximity to retail and to restaurants, just the in-office amenities, snacks and refreshments and beverages and happy hours and, pet-friendly environments, all of those things. And I agree with you that, that's in part due to the labor shortage right now. So it is, it's an employee market as opposed to employer market right now. And some of that pressure may ease, but I do think employees will continue to want the options in the hybrid working environment.
I mean, I think both of you are, my current thesis is that it's not going to be as big, but it's going to be small but significant. So a really important part of the population is going to have a lot more choice and a lot more flexibility, and that's going to lead to some really significant retail opportunities. But we shall see. I do want to get to so many great questions coming in. Any thoughts this is from Sharon, any thoughts on what retail would work on a mixed-use residential project on an MTA train line? This is a very specific one.
On an empty train line?
MTA.
Oh, MTA, excuse me. Okay. Oh, I think it's important to look. I mean, this is where the placer data comes in to see, what are the trends? What are the day and day part? When does the day get started? And going through that consumer mindset all the way from, fitness and working out in the morning, coffee, lunch, shopping on your lunch break, walking your dog at night. I think thinking about it in terms of that, how your consumer moves through the day.
That's a great one.
And making sure that you have everything for them there.
Yeah, amenity and service.
And Nicole, you get to start with this one. It comes in from Mary. Because larger format stores like Target are adding store within stores, is that hurting smaller format independent grocers?
I don't think so. I mean, I haven't seen anything that would lead to that at all.
I also don't think so. I don't know, Elizabeth, your thoughts?
I agree. I think there's some novelty in the specialty grocers. It's more curated. It feels like things are specially selected for you when you're there. There's sort of a quaintness. So I don't think so at all.
There's something about them that's definitely not the Target experience. I think that's less of the competition. Another question that came in, aside from Whole Foods, why is Amazon having such issues with brick and mortar? Just announced all non-WF closings. I assume that's Whole Foods. I think they closed their bookstores, but they have Amazon Fresh that's still expanding. They have Amazon Go. It seems like they're refocusing. I think one of the big things about Amazon, if you want to understand their behavior, they are a tech company. Tech companies optimize. They move quickly, they try things, and then if they don't work, they get rid of them. And that type of, by the way, you're seeing more of that with the Walmarts of the world and Targets too, of test, understand quickly and move on, one way or another. So I actually think it's an optimization move much more than any sign of weakness. I don't know if Elizabeth or Nicole, you feel differently.
I would agree 100%. I think that a lot of people forget about the tech component of Amazon, and there's a lot of things that they take out of, understanding the consumer and the tech part of the consumer behavior. So I would agree with you 100%, Ethan.
And I think in our industry, we think about openings being good and positive and successful and closings being failures. And I think you made a great point. It's optimizing for them. They're not thinking about it as necessarily a failure. It's just something was wrong, so let's fix it.
You touch on this. It is one of the first things we saw. I had just joined Placer. We did an analysis. Walmart had closed a handful of super centers. And it was a Business Insider article that basically said, all right, give up everyone. It's the retail apocalypse. If Walmart's feeling it, you're all done for. When we looked at those locations, they were not bad performing locations. What they did have in common was that they were cannibalizing other Walmarts very significantly. There was huge overlaps between the audiences that were going to both. So people were leaving their house saying, I want to go to Walmart, and having to choose between two. Whereas Walmart said, no, we want it to be very clear where you should go. And this is what we want out of retail. We want retailers to have an optimized fleet, a strategically located fleet, so that those stores are going to last longer, the jobs are going to be there longer, they'll serve their communities longer. I think this is an unbelievably positive thing. You're going to see it with direct-to-consumer companies. And as more companies take on this digital perspective of maybe not as many locations, but much more longer lasting locations. And with that, we have to close because we have run out of time. I want to thank Nicole and Elizabeth so much for being here. This was so much fun. I really appreciate you both joining.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It.
Always a pleasure.
And everyone, thank you so much for being here. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. We have our next webinar coming out in early May, where we're going to do a full-on look at this kind of 2 years post, the pandemic's retail impact kicking off. So please join us for that. And we hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day. And thank you all so much for joining us today.